All right, we're going to do a real quick semester review from last semester. Uh, um, just bullet points about everything we went over. So we talked about all these different cultures and peoples and everything. First, talked about the Solutreans. This is all part of the migration waves that came over from the rest of the world into North America. Solutreans started about 23,000 years or 20,000 years ago-ish, somewhere in there. And they came over across the Atlantic from Europe, probably chasing ice flows and the migrations of animals across those ice flows. That was kind of during the height of the glaciation at the time. Remember, the Atlantic was a little bit smaller due to that, and they were able to come over in some canoes. There's some archaeological evidence along the east coast of the United States. These people were there. And we got the coastal migration hypothesis. This one talks about the down the west coast of America from Asia, people in boats, canoes, kayaks, what have you, came all the way from Alaska all the way down into South America, southern tip of Chile down there. And then the Clovis people, they were thought to come overland through Beringia. That was the land bridge between Alaska and Siberia in Russia, Asia. And then as the glaciers retreated, they were able to come down through Canada and into the United States. And you can see here the different thoughts here. The Solutrean people came across the ice flows here. The Kelp Highway, the Kelp Highway theory, coming down across Asia and down North and South America. And then the Clovis people, there's a Beringian standstill where people had moved in. They got stuck by the ice, by the massive glaciers, and then they were able to follow a few years later, or a few thousand years later. We also talked about the Olmecs, 2500 to 400 BC. Remember, BCE, before the Common Era. Us being the Western Christians, our calendar revolves around Jesus. And so BC, before Christ, AD, Anno Domino. But now we use the more neutral term BCE, before the Common Era, and AC or CE, the Common Era, which we live in. The Olmecs were the first civilization in Mesoamerica, in the Americas, first great civilization. We don't know much about them. They kind of live down here in the Veracruz area, in the Gulf. Remember, we live up here. It takes 716 hours, a good 3 months, walking 8 hours a day to walk all the way around there. They're known for their colossal heads. We don't know much about these colossal heads other than they existed. We don't know who they are. We kind of believe they were the chieftains. We can't interpret their writing systems. We're not really sure. I mean, they could be football stars, right? Because they got the helmets on and everything. But we kind of believe that they were chieftains because there were other figures with similar features that sat on thrones and such. And then we had the Mayas. The Mayas kind of coexisted in the same sort of area. The Mayas were still running around even after their civilization sort of collapsed. They were still running around during the times of Columbus and the Conquistadors. Still come around here. This is Chichen Itza. And that's the pyramid at Chichen Itza, one of their capital cities, sort of. Cancun is over here. You can fly to Cancun in a couple hours, hour and a half, something like that. I've been to this. It's really neat. It's really big. They don't have anybody down there for size comparison, but it is a pretty neat place. Everybody should go check it out sometime. We talked about the Incas. The Incas, again, they were in South America, way down here in Peru. If we were way up here, you got the Olmecs, the Mayas, the Aztecs way down here. Now, supposedly there's a road that you could take that goes all the way down here, but you have the Darien Pass or Darien Gap right here. It's about 60 miles. Normally, if you were to go from here 60 miles away, it'd take you about an hour. But here, if you were to try to drive through there, yeah, there's a road sort of, but it takes about 6 months to go that 60 miles. It's just slow going through the swamps and jungles of the region. Also, every single colonization effort that anybody tried to do down here in the Darien area failed. It's so impassable that even though the Incas, they coexisted at the same time as the Aztecs, and they were trading with the Aztecs, even though they just completely bypassed this and just went up by boat. They didn't even try to go overland with their trade routes, which brings us to the Aztecs. We call the Aztecs. They built their city on a lake, Mexico City. Originally 6 tribes. They came out of northern Mexico, southern United States, walked down through here. They inhabited the Toltecs, the old Toltec cities until they got down here, worked as mercenaries until there was a big civil war, and then they kind of took over. It was actually an alliance of 3 different tribes. You guys remember that? Where the Aztecs themselves were the biggest and baddest tribe around. Then we come into the age of exploration. We go back a little bit. The Aztec, the Inca, they overlap with Columbus, right? And we hit the age of exploration. Columbus came in his 3 voyages here. We've got a couple Cabot sailing out from England, Cartier sailing out from France. But mostly during this time, it was the Spanish and the Portuguese. Remember, Magellan sailed around the world. He actually ended up dying up here in the Philippines and Indonesia area. But his ship continued on. Vasco da Gama came out of here and sailed around Africa, Portugal, and this. And Portugal ended up getting all of this, and Spain got all of this. Talked about the conquistadors. They're mostly Spanish conquerors. Cortez, if you remember, Cortez was really the only one that conquered through the sword. Everybody else kind of conquered through disease. Not that they purposely set off disease, it just sort of happened because of the diseases that the Europeans have. The natives in the Americas, they didn't have those diseases. They had no immunities to those diseases, mostly because they didn't live with their livestock, because they didn't really have livestock. So Cortez, but he actually moved fast enough that he beat the disease into Mexico City. De Soto came up here. By the time De Soto got going through Florida and into this area with the Mississippian culture, they were getting weak and dying off. The disease passed them. Same thing with Coronado. By the time Coronado got up here, well, the Anasazi, they weren't around anymore. But these Southwest tribes, they're kind of on a decline. The Pueblos and everything anyway. Just the natural rise and fall of civilizations. But they also ravaged by diseases. And as you may remember, Pizarro, when he went down there towards the Incas were already in a civil war caused by smallpox, which the Europeans had brought over. And when the Incas had finished mopping up that civil war, they turned around and Pizarro was just standing there in the middle of the Incan capital city and saying, yeah, you guys are working for me now. So that's kind of the way the conquistadors went. Not to say that they weren't brutal, they absolutely were, but natural disease kind of did most of the work. Yeah, we talked about medieval Europe, a little bit about what was going on at the time. They had printing press. They're getting mechanical, starting to build machines. They had a printing press so that literacy was on the rise. They were putting out stuff like Bach. If you listen, I'm not going to play it right now, but if you listen to Bach, you'll see that the music is getting rather sophisticated. They're building ocean-going vessels that can travel all the way across the oceans. However, they were still living in barns. This is the bed. They'd bring in all their animals at night. At the time, there were still wolves in Europe and England. So they would attack the livestock at night. So instead of that, they'd bring them inside. This is actually after the invention of the chimney. Otherwise, prior to this, it'd just be an open fire pit with a hole in the roof. And while that's their way they're living, they're also building all this really neat stuff. And we also talked about European colonization and the different ways that the different powers colonized. The Dutch, they were just looking for trade, and they would build ports. They would buy the land in order to build the trading posts. They would buy the land from whatever natives, whether in India or South Africa or in the Americas. They would buy that land and build a trading post. The French, they were mostly looking for trade as well, but they didn't even go through the trouble of building trading posts. They would just send onesies, twosies over there. They'd have a little port somewhere, and everybody else kind of dispersed from them. The whole mountain man or voyageur, if you get into that kind of folk tales and stuff, that comes from the French. The Spanish, yeah, they were out there by conquest, colonizing all over the New World. In fact, the Spanish Empire, they did so good colonizing Mexico that Mexico actually, the people born in, the Spanish born in Mexico would travel across the Pacific Ocean and come over here and colonize the Philippines. That's how the Philippines ended up speaking Spanish today. But they were actually big colonizers. England, they weren't looking for riches. They weren't looking for gold. They were mainly looking for resources, lumber, fish, textiles like cotton, other cash crops like tobacco as well. They were looking to expand through that means. And then later on, as you watch this tick by, and we get up into the late 1800s and the 1900s, and you can see England's color here, this sort of pinkish, and boom, they're all over the world. At one point, they had colonies in a fifth of the world. Most of that was because as other great empires fell, first the Dutch, the Portuguese, the Spanish, the French, the English, they kind of took over those colonies administratively and then set about efforts to decolonize. So if you have any questions, go ahead and leave it in the comments. Thank you.